Hey, good morning, and welcome to another episode of The Guard Tower. I'm Tony Garcia, and to my right is.
Danny, hey, how's it going?
I'm doing good. It's going good. How are you?
Very good.
All right, let's get some topics going on today. Today, I think we're going to discuss in house security versus contract security. And let me try to lay out some groundwork here. That way, people understand exactly what's going on, especially for the state of Arizona. I know that we get a lot of questions when people review this and look at this and go, "Well, that's wrong. That's not how it is in Oklahoma." Well, guess what? I agree. We're in Arizona, and this is all Arizona law. Okay, so by definition, a contract security company is regulated by the Department of Public Safety, and it is usually any company that is employed by another entity. An in-house security department basically is employed directly from that company. So hopefully that puts a little context into what we're going to talk about today, and I'll give some more context as we go along. As I said, contract security is regulated by the Department of Public Safety. Everything from uniforms to training hours to disciplinary, what they do out there on the street. An in-house security department is not regulated at all by the Department of Public Safety. They can pretty much do whatever they decide to do for training, for uniforms, for enforcement of laws, etc., etc. I can tell you that I've worked for both. I've worked for both in-house and contract security, and this is where you could jump in too, because I understand that you worked at both as well. I could tell you my feelings. My feelings is this: there's pluses and minuses to both. I made more money in the contract security world, but I've also been treated more as a number in the contract security world.
Yeah.
Versus being in an in-house department, being valued about your opinion, being valued about your ideas. Meanwhile, and I was a director of operations for a contract security company where I ran the contract everywhere from Chicago all the way out west to Utah, including Arizona, Texas, et cetera, et cetera. But that was pretty rough. I was making a lot of money, but I was also getting calls 24/7. It was insane, from guards, from clients. I get calls in the morning. Hey, the security guard's not here. Hey, what do you want me to do? I'm in Arizona. You're in Chicago. But hey, I'll start making some calls. So it was a unique, different type of job, but I got paid extremely well. So it was totally different. I currently work for an in-house security department now, which is a little bit easier. It's a little bit more professional. It's a little bit more, they value my opinion a little bit more. So it's a whole different ballgame. It's usually Monday through Friday. I don't get calls on weekends. So that's a huge, huge difference. Haven't you worked for a contract security company before?
I have. So the one that we were working for was on a utilities contract, and it was a really big utilities company. Still is really big utilities company in the valley. They handle, I'd say, most of the water and electricity for a lot of the municipalities, and way out in the middle of nowhere too. But what was fortunate for me, I think, is I got to experience every aspect of it, from starting as just an unarmed facility guard, kind of badge checking at a gate, then getting armed about a year later, and then getting promoted from that pretty quickly into being a field supervisor, which meant I could drive around. We would take sectors of and they're really big sectors, basically northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, and you take a truck, you do a pass down, and then you drive around for, our normal shifts are 8 hours, but most of the time we were working 12 hours because we were short people all the time. So you're driving around for, let's say, 10 of those hours, checking dams, power stations, water stations, facility gates, stuff like that. and then checking in with those same unarmed gate guards that I started as, checking in with those guys, making sure they're awake, for the most part. But that whole experience took about, I think, 3.5 years total, from kind of beginning to end, till I transitioned into the other in-house municipality stuff. But do you remember how many contracts you had when you were a director?
Well, when I was a director, I only had one client.
Okay.
That was a nationwide client, but it was a pretty big client. I've also been a director of operations for another security company where I had up to 15 contracts. Talk
Okay.
about not knowing where your officers are, not knowing what you're doing. That was a whole different ball game. And then what I learned with that one is contract really is geared toward making money.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they're designed to do. That's everything from purchasing uniforms, from making sure that, my gosh, it's such a long journey that I had. I remember when I first got in the Marine Corps, I worked for another security company as an unarmed guard. That was eye-opening because I was lucky to get paid sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a huge company that I work for. But once again, if you didn't have a good manager, then, man, they could care less. So there were weeks where I wouldn't get paid, and I'd be like, oh my God, I just got out of the Marine Corps. I'm used to 1st and the 15th. They would tell me, well, maybe in 2 more weeks, we'll catch up the pay.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was crazy. So I've done everything out there under the sun. I've done hospital security, school security. So it's just I've just run the gauntlet, but I've done everything from an unarmed guard all the way to a director.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've learned with the contract security. It's all about the money. And the worst problem is that people are going to say, well, that's not true, Tony. We believe in quality. I'm going to say, probably not. What I've learned is that in order to do it right, you have to spend some money.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be willing to spend some money as a contract security company. Well, and I guess as an in-house security department, that would be true too, because you guys have a ton of equipment too, right?
In my current
Yeah.
role, yeah, we do.
Yeah, and in order to maintain that equipment, you got to be willing to do what? Spend some money.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easier if it's an in-house or some type of muni department.
Yeah.
But even then, you guys have a certain budget, right?
Yeah, we fall under, so that gets a little tricky sometimes because you're under a very big umbrella, but you're a very tiny piece of that system. So we fall under the PD budget and the PD rank structure and all that stuff. So our money comes from the police department. So that means that we also get some of their hand-me-downs, which is kind of nice. But at the same time, though, when they're freaking out about overtime, even though, let's say we're like 0.002% of their overtime budget, we still have to follow the same overtime guidelines as they do, even though it's not going to have any, relatable effect or any, measurable effect. So we still have to, we kind of fall under the wake of those issues that come up. Because apparently, like for us, the patrol guys have been doing just so much overtime that like the overtime budget's like almost triple what it should be basically. So they're cracking down on everybody.
Wow.
There's well, I don't want to say too much, but let's say there's certain patrol guys who are a little bit higher ranking who decided that they wanted to spend all of their weekends doing hours for detention or PSA stuff, which for them is some of that's easy work, but when you're doing 20-30 hours a week of easy work overtime, somebody else could be doing that
Sure.
at a different rate, and so
yeah.
there's a lot of that discussion going on. But our equipment gets maintained pretty good.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the ins and outs of contract versus in-house.
Mm-hmm.
What I've also learned, the biggest difference is the benefits.
Yeah.
With contract security, you usually don't have too many benefits unless you were at certain levels. Managers, directors, vice presidents, they usually get pretty good benefits.
Yeah.
But if you're just an unarmed guard, you're probably not going to get that many benefits versus the benefits you have now,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you got city benefits, pretty good,
Yeah,
right?
they're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So pay's probably a little bit different than being versus contract versus in-house. Contract pay wise is usually a lot less than in-house, which I find amazing because if we
Yeah.
actually look at the profit margins that these security companies are making,
Yeah.
it's outrageous. I mean, the bill rate, because everybody's got to understand the difference between the pay rate and the bill rate.
Mm-hmm.
The bill rate is what they're charging the client. That could be up to $45 an hour. I mean, it's outrageous sometimes.
Yeah.
Then they turn around and pay an officer $18 an hour,
Mm-hmm.
and the profit margin it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But then, and I've had this conversation with plenty of owners. Well, Tony, we got to pay for insurance. We have to pay for uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
We have to pay for the office. We have to pay for everything else.
Yeah.
But 45 minus 18, that's a huge profit.
So the overhead justification, right? It's like too much overhead.
That's
Yeah.
what they always try to say.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, they could do whatever they want to say. And then what's even worse is when it comes to contract companies, you actually have those guys who try to underbid everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So they could actually still pay a guard 18, but maybe they charge the client 30, and then they're barely making it, and then they complain that nobody wants to pay them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you go solicit yourself, stop underbidding everybody and
Yeah.
maintain your composure when you want to go sell something.
Yeah.
And then when you're in-house, you usually get better pay, you usually get better benefits, you usually get a lot more respectableness from the people that you're serving. So if I had to make my decision on which one I like better, I actually love in-house more than I do contract security. It's just
Yeah.
because I could tell you, like, from my viewpoint, like, even as a director, when I had to report to the owner of the contract security company, I'd be in meetings and I would tell them the truth. Hey, here's the issue. We're not paying our guards. We can't retain anybody. It's your job to convince them to stay. Well, yeah, it's hard when that guard comes back and says, Tony, I just got a $3 raise from another company.
Yep. Yep.
Hey, more power to you, man. That's amazing.
They got to
That's
pay
awesome.
the bills. Yeah.
Yeah. So, luckily in my in-house department, I've never had that issue so far. Because I mean, I feel like my in-house department gets paid pretty well compared to contract companies.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. So, how did you like working for the contract company?
So I think what I liked the most about it, at least in my role that I spent the most time in as a field supervisor, was the amount of freedom that I had, because we were driving around and you had a few mandatories, but you could check basically whatever else you wanted other than those few mandatories, and you were trying to check 25 spots every shift. So, you know, a spot could include a canal, it could include a dam, a substation, power station, water turnoff structure, stuff like that. So it wasn't hard to get 20 to 25, but you could definitely, if you were slacking, you could definitely come in at like 10, you know, and that was usually frowned on. But other than that, though, being stuck at a facility, I didn't always enjoy that. Now, when I was stuck at a facility with Isaac, it was super fun, right? We had a good time.
Oh, that guy.
So he was with me at that first facility, which is great. So we got a lot of good times there. But when you're stuck with someone you don't like working with, and you're doing a 12-hour overtime shift, that's not always great, right? But that's any job. But the facilities became those were a little more mundane, a little more repetitive. But then when you kind of got to being something like a roving kind of field soup, then you're like, okay, I can do this, right? I don't mind doing this for 60 hours a week or whatever.
How was your pay rate?
So it went up from every time I had gotten some kind of promotion, it went up $2, and so that happened pretty quickly. So that that was actually a blessing that surprised me a little bit. So starting unarmed, I think at the time unarmed was starting at 16. If I had to nail it down, and then becoming armed, you bump up to 18, and then becoming a field soup, you bump up to 20, and then over time you're supposed to get a little bit of an increase, every year, which sometimes was only like 20 cents or something,
Sure.
depending on kind of the contract negotiation and all that good stuff. I think they're making in that role, I think they're making the same hourly rate as I am in-house, but their benefits are so much worse that I don't think it compares, as far as the full package and just what you're having to pay for on the medical side.
Well, that too, on the contract side, most of those guys going armed have to pay for all their equipment. We're talking pay for their weapon, duty belt. I mean, that alone right there could be $500 to $1,000 depending on the duty weapon that you want to take. I'm pretty sure with the in-house department, they would issue you out all that equipment.
So what's funny about that is, right now in my in-house role, I've paid for most of my equipment, and then in my field supervisor role, almost all of my equipment was issued to me.
Really?
Yeah, so it was the opposite for me. Other than, of course, like the taser itself. So in my current role, that taser is provided by the PD, and it's issued to you specifically, right? Everything else, I had purchased myself, but we do get a uniform allowance, and so you can offset that, right? Even though some guys call their uniform allowance their gun bonus, because they've already paid for all their uniform stuff by the time they get it, and so once they get it, they're like, okay, now it's daddy's turn, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing world out there for the contract security guys. What they face, what they deal with on an everyday basis. But let's talk about pay rates too. Like Isaac can contest. Man, we're running into some crazy pay rates out here. Like unarmed guards are making anywhere between 25 to 30, and man, armed guards, depending on where you want to go, up to $62, I think, is what they said last time, right? Out there on that border.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a combination of things. Like, first off, safety, security, right? So, with a couple of different kind of policies, you're seeing less cops and then seeing more security.
Well, and that's a good point too, because I think we've talked about this a long time ago. I firmly believe that a lot of security, if done right, could take over for a lot of issues that police officers do.
Yeah.
I mean, and you mentioned all the overtime and all that stuff. I don't believe a police officer should be working an extra 20 to 30 hours of overtime per week. I think it should be limited. I think that if you had a good enough security company that was willing to spend the money on different things like training, quality people, but still charge the client a good amount, that everybody would be happy and the police would be freed up. You know what I mean? Like, I've said this before many times. I don't think I don't see a need for a police officer on a campus. I just don't. What do they do all day? Right? I mean, most of the time they're just intimidating the kids. Hopefully a school has a good school resource officer, but if you put a well-trained, well-educated security officer out there that looks good, can communicate, is armed.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Then put all those officers out on the street. Problem solved. Manpower solved. But I could tell you honestly, you know who's going to fight us on this idea would be most of the police unions.
Yeah.
Because most of them would turn around and say, Tony, you're full of it. There's no way they can handle it. They don't have the authority to do what we do. They don't have the training to do what we do. They don't have the background to do what we do. But I would tear that apart. I'd be like, well, for the training, I could train you just as well as a police officer today. Starting today, I got the same lesson plans as the sheriff's office. Background, All it takes is just paying a little more, right, than an average security officer, and then having somebody qualified. Pay them $20 to $25 an hour, because you're still working Monday through Friday. You're getting off at 5 o'clock at night. Come on. I mean, there'd be plenty of people who would jump at that. And then the authority, which we could start talking about the history of security. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to see or hear in 2024 that people think that security companies don't have authority. They they can't do anything besides observe and report. That's all they're designed to do. Well, that's not true. Yeah. Everything's based on the company and the client. If the client wants you to arrest people for trespassing, and you're the company who's willing to take that contract, you can enforce that pretty easy. And it goes back to the history of security, like where we're going to talk about right now. I know in my classes that I teach about Pinkerton Security, one of the oldest security companies in the United States, right? They started off by taking care of the President of the United States. That was actually a contract security company who oversaw the security of the President of the United States. Does that sound like a powerful company? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but then you go back to 2024, and now security companies are barely, we're just here to observe and report. Well, what happened from the 1800s to 2024 that you took care of the president, and now you're back to where we're just going to observe and report?
I think there's definitely a fear of litigation and liability. But are we breaching too much into the other topic, do you think?
It's up to you guys if you want to just
I think
going.
It's a good transition, because we've talked about the history now, right?
Yeah.
Because you're going to bring up the Romans, right? You're going to bring up, hopefully you looked at the sheriff, the night watchman.
So those came up, but not in depth. Those were sort of just mentioned as like a side thing. But I just wasn't sure if it was two episodes or not.
Oh no, let's make them one. Let's make them one long.
Yeah,
okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm keeping all this, so.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm not editing this out.
So I think the fear of litigation and liability has accumulated more and more over time, right? Where not only are the companies themselves fearing getting sued or getting losing their contract, but now the actual guards or the contract employees are concerned about having their own liability, their own litigation, and so there's so much fear around it that I think that's what's causing that.
Well, I also think that there's a lot of an image problem too with contract security companies. A lot of people feel that they're not qualified, that they don't know what they're doing. They just hire anybody. So I think it's a good propaganda that a lot of entities have used against contract security companies. Because no offense to you, right? No offense. You work for a Muni, all right? Could I design a security company to do what you do, right? Charge the city less, save the city some money, right? And still offer the same level of service? I don't know.
So what's funny about that, we had we had half of our workforce, basically for our unit's jobs, we had half of our workforce as contract security guys up until just last year, because at one point during COVID the unit shrunk down so small that once things started kind of expanding again and opening up again, they needed more help. So they brought in a contract company, a very well-known one in the Valley. And we had, when I first started training there at the court, we had 4 of those guys on the team with us. And there were only about 4 of us, which included me. So it was about 50-50 for a while. And so I worked with those guys. And then they decreased the number. And then just last year, we finally did away completely with contract guys. And I will say that the the total conclusion of that whole experiment was that they were never as good as we are, because we go through a completely different vetting process, right? Different hiring process, and that it may have saved them a little money on the benefits, but it didn't seem to save them much money on like the actual day-to-day kind of hourly operations. And that's as far as I know. I'm not up top where the books get figured out and stuff like that. So this is just what I've heard from, let's say, like my command structure, like they've mentioned stuff like that. And they do stand around talking with us about stuff. So they're pretty open about having discussions. We never feel like we're in the dark, which is nice. But that's one of the other benefits of in-house is you can usually talk to the people who are involved in your rank structure. When you're contract, you're so far removed from that you may as well just not know
what's going on. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like I say, I work for one now, and I love my in-house department versus the contract security company I left prior to, and I still run this place. So it's I'm pretty busy all day long. But let's talk about the history of security, though. You brought up some notes.
I did, yeah. So what's strange about the history of private security is a lot of people can't wrap their head around the ancient times versions, which I mean, if you look it up, there's some really interesting stuff about like in the 5th century. So let's say, in our head when we think of Roman guards, right, you might be thinking of like biblical times, you might be thinking of centurions, you might be thinking of something like the movie Gladiator, right? You're kind of all these things come to mind. But apparently one of the first official forms of private security were actually Roman soldiers who were not at war, like when they were in between campaigns, let's say. They would essentially be hired almost like little mercenary units. They'd be hired on the side to do private protection for noblemen, shop owners, shopkeepers, watching their basically life and property, the same stuff that we take care of now. But they would be paid to do that, and I'm not sure if that meant they were still getting paid as a soldier and also getting that money on the side. But back then, who knows how deep the economy went with that. But another interesting thing is the shop owners, when they would hire private security to watch their stuff at night, they called them janitors. So that's where that term comes from, and I guess it's related to the Roman or Greek god Janus. So janitors were actually like doorkeepers, gate guards. They would like watch the entrance, and apparently they were so well known for taking off in the middle of the night because they were exhausted that the shopkeepers started chaining them to the building, and so they couldn't. So if they were hired to watch the store, it was kind of understood in their in their contract or whatever that they would get chained to the building so that they couldn't leave.
Talk about not leaving your post.
Yeah, you would leave your post.
So can't leave your post till your backup gets here.
Yeah, so I was under the impression that all these legions were, I would assume they were all mercenaries in one way or another, because they weren't really soldiers to Rome. I mean, Rome in itself had soldiers, but majority of them were to their loyalty was to like a senator, right, or whoever was hiring them specifically. That's what I was under the impression. So I would assume if it wasn't wartime, that person probably wouldn't be paying that person for nothing, right? So they would have to get work somewhere. That's what it's looking like or sounding like.
Oh, I see. Interesting. It reminds me of that scene in Gladiator where he's he's like walking, and like his second in command or whatever finds him, right? And he's like, "How are the men doing?" And he's like, "Fat and bored," because they haven't been warring, right? But yeah, I'd be curious to learn more about kind of how they got paid or when they got paid, because obviously now with our national militaries, it's such a big bureaucratic structure that like you're pretty much always on call, right? It's like you can and of course Isaac knows way more about this.
So like a
than
National
we do.
Guard.
Yeah, well, Guard too. So I guess, but they're being paid
Only when they work, though,
part time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, only when they work. I mean,
Okay.
But you know, it's funny that you say that when you bring up Roman times to today. Well, and then everybody's got to understand how diverse the contract security world really is. I mean, you get guys who can still hire private armies now
Oh yeah.
to do whatever they want, like because to me those are just high valued security guards. So it's just depending on what you want to hire them for. Do you want to hire them for executive protection? Do you really want to hire them to go take out the rebels in a mountain? It all depends on what you want. I mean, we're dealing with a security company now that is taking care of the border.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys are like out there on the front line. Like, it's amazing on what those guys are doing. So, but to me, that's a private little army. That's you're hiring guys out there to stop everybody coming through.
Mm-hmm.
well, what it sounds like is it depends on how much leeway the government is allowing the security companies now.
Well, I think it's not so much the government, it's the leeway of the client, which in this case is the government.
Right. And I was just where you were bringing up the Pinkertons. I mean, I'm assuming that at some point they stated this has to be a government entity. This cannot be a private entity, which is where I'm seeing the separation. Right.
Oh no! So what happened was that guy Pinkerton decided to make the government organization, which actually was the Secret Service. So they made the Secret Service. They just decided, like you said, that maybe it's wiser to have this under government protection versus a private company. But once again, it's up to the client. I mean, if a client wants to hire a security company to walk around their compound with M16s, well, then guess what? That's allowable because you're on private property.
Yeah.
I think people forget like how much authority a contract security company can have, depending on the client. Mm-hmm. If the client wants you to arrest people because they jumped your fence line on your property, well, then guess what? They can do that. Mm-hmm. Okay, out there in the real world, you're going to say, Tony, they can't arrest. And I'm going to say, okay, detain.
Detain.
Okay. Like, there's, okay.
Plus, once you detain them, if you hold them a certain way for too long, they can try and charge you with kidnapping.
Sure. But you know what, though? At the end of the day, you know what? Here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Can a cop hold you that long?
No, they got to get you moving.
Right.
Yeah.
They only have
to a local magistrate.
I think they only have up to 72 hours. Even then, they have up to 72 hours to charge you. If they don't charge you past 72 hours, you could consider it what? Kidnapping. Like.
Well, there's a different term for it that it's not coming to mind right now. But yeah, it's being
it's
unlawfully
the same.
detained.
It's the same
terms.
concept. Yeah.
Constable on patrol.
Constable.
Cop.
Yeah.
To the local magistrate.
Right.
I love how it words it in the ASRS.
And it's so funny on how people think that a cop has more authority. Well, they do to a certain degree, right? They enforce the law. But the best way to describe it is, like I always said, with school security, right? A police officer can't get into a locker of a kid. They need what?
Probable
right?
cause.
Right. Okay. A school security officer can do what?
Yeah.
They got the power.
They got the power. So in that scenario, who has more power?
I think part of it is also probably public perception. I mean, the reason why a shop owner, let's say Walmart, they're more scared of Twitter than they are of their actual boss, right?
Yes.
So they're going, oh, well, don't do that if somebody's filming you.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, like I said,
even if it's legal.
I have to do a lot of traveling for my job, and I see a lot of things from city to city. And what I've learned is I actually blame those departments for their own theft. The way that the department store is set up. Like, okay, you have this wide area that somebody can just run through, and nobody's there to stop them.
Mm.
Like, if I'm down on my luck and homeless, and I could go to the Target and steal some stuff and know that nobody's going to get in my way from the doorways, what am I going to do? I'm stealing from Target.
This reminds me of I had a moment a couple weeks ago. I was trying to buy fireworks, right? And I walked into the Walmart, and they still have greeters. Some of them, right, still have greeters. And what's interesting about this greeter is this greeter had to be. I would have bet $1,000 that this greeter was a Vietnam veteran, because he's standing there and like just his like presence, like his command presence, was intimidating, and like he was still giving the greeting out loud, right? You could still hear his he was still saying the nice words, but just the way he was like looking, laser eyes through the soul kind of thing, and like and putting his arms together, or like keeping him up front, and like he was just like standing up, staring people down, and I was like, I'm not gonna steal anything, but now I definitely don't want to steal something, because
well, let me tell you too, like I've seen security guards I'm sorry, not security guards, security officers scare people and intimidate people as soon as they walk in the door. Like I've seen this before, where the security officer basically says hello and intimidates the hell out of the client, where I was like, wow, that's pretty good.
Is that this big guy right here?
I'm not saying anything.
I could see that. I could see that.
I'm not saying anything, but I've seen that
with
too.
the booming voice.
I don't know
Hello.
if I told Danny that story.
I could already see it in my head as soon as he said it.
So I was like, wow, Isaac, like, you got to calm down. So.
Did you recover from that? Was she all right?
It was a headache, and we'll talk about it later. Okay,
offline. I gotcha.
But then you bring up a good point, like the deterrent of even having security, right? What I find amazing is like how people hire off-duty cops for a deterrent. Yeah. Well, what's the difference between hiring an off-duty cop and a security officer? They're both deterrents, because I got news for you guys. If the off-duty cop were to do something, arrest somebody, guess who they got to call? They still got to call an on-duty cop in order to take this person away. It's the same thing as a security officer. A security officer detains somebody, who are they going to call? The on-duty cop. So you just paid $80 to $100 when you could have hired somebody between $40 to $50 for a deterrent, and still look just as good. It all depends on that person. That person looks like they're paying attention. It's a world of difference. So
plus, this is just we like to blame Gen Z for this, even though it's probably unfair to put it in their lap. There's a lot of sergeants on patrol that are getting really laxed about uniform protocols and procedures and personal grooming and stuff like that. So I've seen some sketchy looking PD guys in the past couple of years that were like, they walk in and you're like this guy's not put together correctly.
Yeah, you can see that in the military too. I mean, I remember seeing some ate up people, soup sandwiches, and the females, I'm not gonna say are worse. It's different. So they want to be women, and so they want to get all prettied up and dolled up and nails did, and guess what? Monday you're gonna have to either take that shit off or you just look ate up. Sorry, but they come in Monday morning looking like they just came from the club. So well, you don't take that person professionally.
Yeah,
no, not at all.
And it's funny that you bring up uniforms, because I see both sides, contract security and police departments. Some of them are looking so militant nowadays. It's like, why? Like, why are you doing this? Like, shouldn't you just be looking like a normal person? I mean, why are you wearing an outer tactical shell, just standing here at the Circle K, intimidating people? Why not just be in a nice polo? You could still be armed, you know what I'm saying? But why do you have to sit there? And
well, during that incident, I was unarmed, wearing a polo.
I'm not gonna say anything more. I'm just saying that I've seen security people open the door, say hello,
Yeah.
and next thing I know, I almost called the cops myself. I was like, this guy's intimidating everybody. I was like, this guy's got to stop. So
I've mentioned this in the past, but the greeting's a big deal. So like QT, so when you walk into a QT, they always tell you, hey, how you doing? Like they'll address you. That's protocol. So that's in their training, because they figured out that if they forcibly greeted everybody who walks through the door, it decreased their amount of theft by like, I think it was almost 40%. Like it was like a
well,
really
that was
good
the same
margin.
with Blockbuster.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we were forced to, because they wanted people to look up. They wanted people to say hi. Cameras catch their face.
Yeah.
At the same time, they are aware that we're aware.
Yeah, I see you.
you know what I really wish that could happen? Because, I'm with you. QT workers are amazing. Those guys are hustling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, last time I was at QT, the guy made me feel like I was inadequate. He was like this. Come on. Come on.
Two
Yeah.
people at a time.
Come on.
Boom, boom.
And he's still being nice enough about it, but he was like, come on. Come on. And I was like, wow, I'm sorry. I'm not moving fast enough for you. I wish that a contract security company could bring that level of customer service to their company. Like, it's actually amazing to see those guys work, be approachable, still understand that they have a job to do, because I really feel when it comes to contract security, man, they just hire pretty much anybody that they can. Like, and instead of saying, well, I'm just going to hire this guy because he's the only one who came through the door, well, train that guy.
Yeah.
Train that guy to actually work. I do this all the time. I say there's a huge difference between a security guard and a security officer.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, according to state law, we can't call them security officers, I tell everybody that I train, the difference is you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to fall asleep, you're a security guard. If you're going to be chained to the wall, I might have to come up with a new term, but you're still a security officer because you're still out, you're still about, you're still coherent, you can talk to people. So it's just amazing the difference between a security guard and a security officer. It just and it boils down to that person. It boils down to, and to me, the company standard that you set forth.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to hire a schmuck, and then what are you going to end up with? A schmuck. So
And some angry customers usually.
oh yeah.
I'd almost rather he be a pair of warm butt cheeks instead of a schmuck, because the schmuck is going to piss people off. The pair of warm butt cheeks is going to slack, right? And that's not good either. But the guy who's like inflammatory or has the ego, right, that thinks, causes a lot more problems, I think. But going back to the being chained to your post, do you think that's where the term post comes from? Your security post, because they probably chained them to a post so that they couldn't.
Probably. Yeah, I don't know. That's crazy.
Wow, I didn't think about that, but you may be right. Yeah.
That could be it.
Yeah. So in all your study, did you learn about the New York Watchmen?
Yeah, so a little bit of that came up, but unfortunately not enough for me to speak intelligibly on it. So do you want to fill me in?
All it is back in the days in New York, they would hire today's security guard. They would call them night watchmen, and they would actually go around turning on all the lamp lights. Mm-hmm. So that's what the term night watchman came from, which in today's world is security officer. That's so I mean, they were hiring people back in the 1800s as night watchmen, and then that's where that term came from, a night watchman.
Yeah.
So and then the term sharif is actually he was actually basically a security officer in medieval times, but they actually use that term nowadays to be called a sheriff. So it's amazing to see the concept evolve over time. And what I've also thought, and it's taken a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I really think the way of the unarmed guard, it's got to go. I mean, the observe and report is not working. It is not working, even just for intimidating looks. You know what I mean? Like, the armed security guard, you have to almost hire armed security in order just to prevent anything that's going on. Like, it's amazing that you put somebody out there, and how intimidating it could be, and
Yeah.
and the effects. And this is what I used to teach to people too, especially when it came to stores. I always used to survey people and ask them, would you rather shop at the Target that has no security out front, nobody there, or would you rather shop at the security, or shop at the Target that has like an armed security guard outside, is, like you said, meeting people, greeting people, acting nice, being normal? Where do you think most people would shop at? Which one?
Right, the one with security.
The
Yeah,
one with
but-
security.
But you guys have a security mind, though.
Yeah. The ones who.
If I needed to steal, the one without security.
So I feel like there would be some. Let's say you grew up really sheltered, maybe like upper middle class, maybe upper class, right? And in your mind, like the target that needs the security guard is the one that has the most crime, so you don't want to be there. You want to go to the one that doesn't need the security guard because it doesn't have any crime, supposedly. So I think that could be sort of a skewed,
Well,
sheltered way of looking at it.
but you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
But then we're talking about 90% of America who's sheltered,
Yeah.
right? We all go to church, right? We all see the mass shootings. Would you rather go to a church that you kind of know has an armed team somewhere, or would you rather go to a church that says, you know what, we don't believe in that. We believe that everybody is nice, normal, willing to, you know what I'm saying? This is a place of worship. None of that happens here. Does that play into where everybody attends church?
Like I said, I think the most people that I know would rather go to a church that is protected.
Yeah.
I mean, they see the violence going around. They know they're persecuted, right? So they would like security there.
But do they want it to be seen?
Yeah, that's going to be dependent. Like the church I've seen, all the big churches, I'm talking these huge churches, they usually have cop presence, and they're out. Like I've seen them just walking around, and
They're in the parking lot.
people
Yeah.
just thank them and ignore them. Right? It's one of those two. And then the smaller churches, they don't have anything.
Well,
So, I
could
don't
they
know.
be undercover too?
I think I'd rather have the undercover, meaning I know that the church has people ready to protect the church, and they might be undercover, and I wouldn't mind either way. But I get what you're saying. You're talking about the civilian population.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you have a different mindset. But I really believe that most people, and it's prevalent in our society. It's safer to have somebody around, even when we go to bars, right? Do we want to see an armed guard outside a bar? No, because we want to do what? We want to enjoy ourselves, and this is where we come to relax. If there's a guy outside, most people think that, oh, there's a problem. What's going on? I'm not going to go to this bar.
Yeah.
So
Do you think that's the same mindset that some schools do, where they think in their head, hey, if we don't show them,
oh yeah, oh by far. Let me tell you what. Back in the day when the posse was real big, the posse volunteered to send their members out to schools. Schools said, no, we don't want you. You got to remember, the posse members looked like sheriff. They wore the exact same uniform, went through the exact same training. A lot of school districts said, no, we don't want that perception. We don't need
Okay.
that perception. We're a safe school district. We don't need anything like that. Most school districts, if they really wanted to, there's a group running around out there called the Arizona Rangers. A little crazy, a little militant, but that's okay. But they would jump at the opportunities to go help secure schools.
Yeah.
They wear all black. They're armed. But a lot of schools are like, no thanks. We don't want that. And it's funny because I've consulted for tons of schools, and they basically said, no, we don't need that kind of security. We're okay. We're We don't need anything like that. But thank you for your opinion. Okay, I gotta go.
It's like we're okay until we're not okay, and then
Oh,
we're
yeah.
regretting.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on schools. It's unbelievable on, and you got to remember, I was a school teacher, so I understand the dynamics of budgeting, money, where it should be well spent. But any school that has just a security guard out there is just waiting for a lawsuit. Because if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, they shot up my child's school. What's your professional opinion on their security department?" I'd be the first one to be on a stand going, "Man, that was such inadequacy what they did,
Yeah.
and what they performed. Like, this school district deserves to be having a lawsuit against them." So, but
So this reminded me of something that I hadn't thought about in decades. So the junior high I went to here in the valley, which I don't need to name it, but we used to joke about it being a prison, because what they would do is once school started, they would lock all, and the entrances had these big metal gates. They would lock all the entrances, lock the outside doors, and we couldn't get out. We couldn't get out because they didn't want us skipping class, because apparently that was a problem they had. Eventually, we would still figure out ways
sure.
to get out, but we didn't have any security. I don't remember there being any security there at all. I remember there being teachers, lunch ladies, principal, maybe some clerks, but I don't remember any security at all. Now, God forbid that junior high, with the kids being locked in, and a lot of the kids not really knowing how to get out, because you kind of had to go into like sort of Mission Impossible, James Bond mode to like find your way out of, out of the building. That just made it more intriguing actually for us after a while.
Yeah, but you weren't a Boy Scout, so the Boy Scouts wouldn't know how to get out.
No, and God forbid we did have a few, let's say, like, you could tell, somewhat like disturbed individuals, and thank God this never happened. But if one of them decided to, start shooting, we're trapped inside with no security, and that's a terrible scenario to be in.
Well, we got to look at the concept of why they would lock everybody down like that. Number one, it also goes back to a theory that I always use when I train people too. Excuse me. It's always this that I teach people: security is not convenience. Inconvenience is security. Once you start understanding that saying, then you're pretty much going to have figured out security. So yes, you know what? Locking everybody down was very inconvenient. But if the thought was to deter anybody from coming in, well, then how convenient is that?
Yeah.
Or it's always just like buildings that have multiple openings, right? Hey, we want my employee to come in on the north side because they don't want to park, or they don't want to walk around to the other door. Well, okay, that's convenience. How secure is that?
Yeah.
It's not, but if you actually only have one way in, one way out, multiple egresses to get out, well, then now you're saying what? Your inconvenience doesn't bother me because we're more secure this way.
Yeah.
I think, to Danny's point, the lack of egress was the problem. So what was it? You guys like locked in and you were tunneled? So there's only like one entrance exit.
Yeah, but I don't even remember that one entrance being open during class hours.
Sure. So when they locked down, I've been to a junior high like that too, and they
really?
locked everything down, and so everything's gated.
Yeah.
And only one person would pretty much the office, right? You would have to go to the office, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's no other egress, right, and a school, let's just say a school fun guy wants to join in, right, and he's in there and he's keeping you guys inside, how are students getting out, right? All the students are going to focus in the office because they're used to that. The Boy Scouts are used to that, while the bad kids know other ways to get out of the school.
Oh yeah.
Right? So there's your target right there. That's the area I want to stay in if I was that kind of mentality, right? Where I'm gonna take out as many victims as possible, and that's a horrible situation. But that's inconvenience with inconvenience, I feel.
Yeah, well, let me throw this disclaimer out there. Nobody better steal my saying, because it is an awesome saying. Security is not convenience. Inconvenience is security. So I don't want to see no banners out there.
You should copyright that.
Man, I'm telling you, like it's crazy. But if you really think about that concept, that's security in a nutshell. And so when I do a lot of consulting, I usually start off with that. Hey,
Yep.
we can do this however you want to play it. It's just that these are the things that you got to be wary about, because, and it's funny too, because a lot of people think that school shootings are new. They're not. You got to remember, I was a teacher, so I was given classes in the beginning of actually what occurred in the past with schools. I mean, they've blown up schools like with dynamite. It's like amazing on the cases that you can find when it comes to school violence. We only learn about them now because why? Everybody is a media expert. Everybody has a cell phone. It can make the news today. Like, somebody came in with a gun. Oh, that's school violence. Blah blah blah. So, but it's amazing on the history of school violence that nobody actually really knows about. It's crazy. So.
Yeah, and the inconvenience concept is funny too, because it goes just as much for employees and other, let's say, other uniforms as it does for the customers too.
Oh yeah.
Because across the board, we had to inconvenience a couple of feds the other day that were coming through the court, because of course they're not coordinating with the municipality, right? The feds are doing their own
And
thing.
that's okay with me.
Yeah. they're doing their own thing. So one of them was and it's fine for me to be talking about this, but one of them was a Department of the Treasury secretary officer, and then the other one was a Homeland Security officer. And so they come in, UC, plain clothes, all that good stuff, and to his credit, the guy was very cool about it, right? He could have made a stink with us, especially being a Fed. But he comes in and he looks around and he's like, we're here investigating somebody, right? Flips his badge open, and it's like, it's funny because the Fed badges are little,
Real small.
Yeah, they're small, right? And it's this little badge, and I'm looking at it, and then he's got his picture ID on there too, right? His Fed card, and I was like, okay. He's like, I'm armed, this and that. I was like, I've never seen one of these before. I'm like, so just give me a second. And he's standing at the front. He's about to screen in, and so I grabbed my supervisor and I was like, have you ever seen one of these before? And he's looking at it. He's looking at
They
the
look
guy.
fake.
Yeah, they don't.
They look fake.
And then he's flipping through it. And then the guy pulls out another ID to be like, here you go. Like, look at this other one too. And we're like, okay, and I'm like, should we lock up? We have a gun locker. Like, should we lock up
They probably did a
his
sting.
arm? Well, he actually, my sergeant decided it was okay to just let him come through and just do what he needed to do. And then we had the second one show up a few minutes after that. She wasn't armed though, so she was basically fine to just come through. Like, it didn't really matter. But yeah, he was willing to lock up his stuff. And so as he's locking up his stuff, my sergeant's like, how long are you going to be here? And the guy's like, oh, well, his hearing's right now. And he was like, okay, if you want to stay armed, you can stay armed, right? And the guy's like, okay, thank you. He puts his stuff back. And then he went upstairs, and we kept an eye on him, but he was fine. Like, his credentials checked out. But we inconvenienced him for a good 7 minutes, right? Having him up there. Some people would make a stink.
Sure, but what if it was fake?
What if it was fake? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
what
thank
I've
God it
seen,
wasn't.
what I've seen with those guys is that we used to have them sign in on a book too, like an LEO book.
Yeah.
That way, if something were to happen afterwards, we at least have a record of that person, not just, hey, these are the IDs. So
Yeah, because that's fishy, man. Since it's Fed and they
oh yeah,
how do you do that? How do you
Into
deal
a
with
little
that?
mini court, yeah.
And how do you protect yourself from that?
Oh yeah. No, I told you I used to work for Superior Court. We ran into that all the time with officers, telling them, hey, are you here for business or are you here for personal? Are you here for a divorce? Blah blah blah. Well, I'm here to get divorced. Can't bring your gun in.
Yeah.
you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. That's not what the presiding judge says.
Yep.
So it's amazing on how those guys think and operate. But man, I would inconvenience those guys left and right because I'm with Isaac. The Fed ID looks fake. Period. It doesn't look real. Like so, it's just I've seen plenty of those, and they just okay.
Yeah, and the little badges are funny too. Like that threw me off when I first started seeing those. I'm like little tiny little guy, just a little badge. So what's interesting about that too is that the judge, you just mentioned it, the judge can actually decide to allow people to bring things in. Yeah. Whoever. I mean, they have the authority over the court, and then the worst part is a lot of officers don't realize that man, if the presiding judge says no cops allowed with weapons, guess what? Yeah.
Presiding judge overrules their jurisdiction. So it used to really make cops upset. Like, okay, well, go back, talk to your department, and have your department call the presiding judge.
Yeah, those are the cops that don't need to be cops. Those are the ones that are tripping on power.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Copy that.
So I guess the final thought or wrap up on private private armies versus private security, stuff like that, is that if you think about it, when it comes to like let's say a dictator who like has some kind of coup and there's like an overthrow, right? If the government becomes illegitimate at some point and his mercenaries are now the private army and now he's running the government because of the coup or the overthrow, at what point does the private security army become the federal official army or mercenaries? Yeah.
Just become official.
Speaking of feds. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the way everything's playing out nowadays, it's just like you say, with the immunity case that just came out, if it's determined that person did an official act by deputizing this army, and then the army turned around and tore up U.S. citizens, well, guess what? You're okay because you did it in an official capacity. That's how I read it. So it'll be amazing to see what happens if they start using their own armies.
Yeah.
I forget. I read somewhere too where they made a volunteer force of armed people in order to enforce voting. I have to go back and look at it. I have to go back and read it.
I mean, look at Mexico, the Mexican army, and then you got the cartel.
What's wrong with the cartel?
Nothing wrong.
Man.
Nothing wrong with the cartel. Disclaimer. But I mean, how quickly is a war can happen in battle between there?
Oh yeah,
Controlling the armies.
And
it's not cartel specifically, but like any entity like that, right?
Well,
versus their government.
Oh sure, yeah, it's pretty scary. Well, I mean, even Blackwater could be better armed than most National Guard units because they're willing to spend the money. So. But hey, we covered a lot of topics. We covered a lot of time.
We did.
I think the next time we'll be able to record is when?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, everybody. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and enjoy your day. Don't steal. Yeah, don't steal my saying. Just telling you right now.
Thanks, Tony.
All right. Thanks, bud.